Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 147 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is a podcast where I discuss current events related to foreign policy and international news. Foreign Policy Focus can be found at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, or the Facebook page of the Libertarian Union. The way you help out the show is by sharing the show or leaving me ratings and reviews on iTunes. All that stuff is beneficial to getting me out there to more people. At this point, for what I'm doing with the show, that's the best way to help. So if you're enjoying what you're hearing, then please take the time to share and recommend the show around. So I want to talk a little bit today on today's show about some current events going on in a select number of countries, and then kind of looking at what side America takes in the war and why we do that. The first place we'll go is North Korea. Recent news in North Korea is that there's a lot of concern about the idea that Americans will launch a bloody nose attack at North Korea. What this attack, I guess, would more or less be is America carrying out what is being labeled a limited strike or a limited raid in North Korea against maybe a missile target or a nuclear target, sending a message to the Kim Jong-un regime that the Americans mean business and they better start negotiating or it's going to get a lot worse. Now, Gareth Porter was recently on the Scott Horton show talking about the idea of coercive democracy, and this is kind of the next step that the Trump administration is taking in this kind of grand American policy, where we try to get what we want out of foreign countries by taking a diplomat position, but bullying the other countries to kind of accepting unilaterally what America wants. We do this through sanctions, and an interesting trend coming out of North Korea is that there's more and more of these ghost ships being found. Because international sanctions on North Korea are so strict, North Koreans have to go pretty far out into North Korean waters to get fish. Also, the Kim Jong-un regime, I think, demands citizens pay, essentially and taxes a certain amount of fish. So fishermen are forced to go pretty far out, I guess, into where is the Korean Sea, East Sea, or Sea of Japan, depending on who you are, what you call it. And some of these boats end up turning up in Japan, and the crew is either all dead or barely clinging to life. And it's a real tragedy to, find these ships and knowing that people are dying out there, and that, probably more ships are being lost at sea than actually making it to Japan. And so with the United States, I think adding another 22 sanctions now to 22 people sanctioned in North Korea now, we just kind of continue that same trend that we lock more and more food and resources from getting to North Korea. And while we always like to pretend and say, oh, what's actually going on is this hurting the Kim Jong-un regime, really what it's doing is just depriving the citizens of the basic necessities and causing them to go out fishing in too deep of waters on dangerous boats. Now, one question would be, is that are the North Koreans really enemies of the American people, and are they looking to really inflict any kind of harm on the American people? Now, I know in the Red Dawn remake, the North Koreans come over to the United States of America and take over, and it's this, giant secret invasion. But in the real world, that's absolutely not possible. There's just not enough North Koreans, and look at all the guns the, Americans have anyways. But there's really no offensive threat coming from North Korea. Other than the United States government and, defense weapons funded think tanks, most people understand that what the North Koreans are trying to achieve with their nuclear program is something called nuclear deterrence. What the North Koreans are hoping to do is create basically such a strong deterrence for the Americans that the Americans would never launch a preemptive attack against North Korea, because North Korea ultimately has the ability to hit a city like LA with a nuclear or hydrogen bomb. Now, I think the North Koreans are still short of that, but they do probably have, a few nuclear bombs laying around now, and they may be able to get one either to the South Koreans, Japan, or Guam and hit a U.S. ally, or even detonate their nuclear weapons anywhere near the DMZ. Seoul is so close, they may be able to kill a couple 100,000 people, use those weapons to kill invading American troops, etc. Also, they have large artillery positions in the mountains overlooking Seoul and the surrounding area, and could really inflict millions of civilian deaths on the South Koreans should war break out. So, the idea of the North Koreans is to be able to inflict damage on America and its allies to the point where America can't attack them first. Now, this doesn't necessarily seem like something that would make the North Koreans the ultimate enemy of the American people and create a situation where there always has to be tense hostilities. we don't necessarily have to form an alliance with the North Koreans. And, I argue for non-intervention, basically meaning, we lift the sanctions and we tell the North Koreans, hey, belligerent states don't do very well on the international stage. And so, if you advocate for a peaceful thing, more people will do business with you, and we're not going to prevent anybody from doing business with you. Something like that, some kind of solution like that. But the North Korean people definitely aren't the enemies of the American people. And the North Korean government itself really doesn't seem to seek out the American people for any kind of war. Now, the South Koreans have made some interesting statements recently, saying, one, that they're afraid that the United States is going to try to launch a preemptive attack, and also that they're saying that it's just not an option to have a preemptive attack. Now, maybe they mean right now, especially with the Olympics coming up, there may be just so much international tourism in South Korea. I'm sure while all these, foreigners, either athletes or diplomats or, heads of state, whatever, are in South Korea, they're probably all going to visit the capital, and this would absolutely put tons of high-ranking people within the range of a war zone. So it still seems unlikely we're going to see a United States unilateral first strike against North Korea, partly because the South Koreans seem really against it. It seems like things are moving in the right direction between the two countries. And while the United States is certainly, I think, unhappy with the rising chances of peace, it does look like peace is still a possibility. Now let's move on to Syria. The news there is the ongoing Operation Olive Branch. I saw some reporting today suggesting that the Syrian army, commanded by Assad, is at least allowing the YPG to move from between their Afrin enclave and the larger Rojava state. I think this is supposed to be allowing the YPG to rearm and restock and then, resupply troops to areas in the Afrin portion of Syria where they're under attack from Turkey. Turkey continues to make threats saying they're looking to eliminate the YPG from Afrin, and also saying that they will next look to Manbij, where the YPG is backed by the United States. It did seem on the Manbij attack, the Turks offered a little bit of an ultimatum, so this suggests that there may be at least an international way out here for the United States. Turkey said that if the United States stops backing the YPG, maybe they won't invade Manbij, so that's something, like I said, that would give the United States and Turkey an out before it came to blows. It doesn't look like Turkey is making too much, if any, progress in Afrin. They've taken a few villages, and I think they're moving into the enclave a little bit. But the YPG seems relatively effective in repelling some of these attacks. And so, pretty much everything Turkey has done in the Syrian civil war, it is not going as planned. So, I know Trump had a conversation with Erdogan. There's a dispute as to what was actually said on that call. But it does look like that we haven't figured out where all the alliances are still in flux. I don't think the Syrian government is quite ready to give the Kurds more support than just allowing them to transition through their areas. It looks like Turkey is going to continue to be aggressive, and I'm not sure if, maybe Erdogan's a little unstable and just has a blind rage towards the Kurds. Reese Erlich was on the Scott Horton show discussing how the PKK and the YPG, while, similar and somewhat related groups, are not looking to establish a united Kurdish state together, and that there are, some important splits between the groups, and that it's not the goal of the PKK in Turkey to necessarily support a YPG state in Syria, and, that's not one of their goals. So, looking at who's the enemy of the American people here, especially when you're looking at either the YPG, Syrian Kurds, or the Turks, neither. None of those people want to hurt America, and so why we're, having to take sides in this makes absolutely no sense. I don't understand why the United States, in this case, doesn't say, well, we're out. We're not going to get between two allies. This is insane. The United States and, Rex Tillerson, as me and Will Porter discussed on Monday's episode, identified U.S. enemies in Syria as ISIS and al-Qaeda, but mostly ISIS, saying that, the risk of insurgency still exists. And what Rex Tillerson doesn't realize is that American continued occupation of Syria is only going to make that insurgency more likely to become more powerful. If the Sunni Arab, I believe, majority in Syria, but specifically the tribal area in the, southern Syria desert and then in East Syria feels oppressed by the Americans, where that's going to fuel jihad and anti-Americanism, especially because everybody knows that it's the Americans that are backing the Kurds that control that territory. And when you look at al-Qaeda, well, the rise of al-Qaeda in Syria was in large part because of the United States and our allies' intervention in that country, not in spite of it. And if we simply would take our kind of hands off of what's going on in Syria, al-Qaeda and ISIS would be eventually, if not somewhat more quickly, wiped out in Syria. Now, one of the problems is that as long as the Americans continue to kill civilians, like we just killed another 30 civilians in eastern Syria, then you're just going to continue to have jihad, because that's the result of it. You can't bomb people and kill people and murder people in the thousands without consequence, and it's just something that we all need to realize. If we do that and we estimate that every, 1,000, even if we estimate, every 1,000 civilians we kill in the Middle East, 10 Americans will be killed in the blowback, at least then we're, having an honest conversation about it. But, we never realize that there, is a real cost to killing people over there. Rex Tillerson also identifies Iran and Hezbollah and Assad as enemies of the American people in Syria. It's just simply not true. If you look at what Iran has done in the Middle East, specifically in Iraq and Syria, it's fight ISIS more than pretty much anybody else, maybe other than Assad, has. Iran has armed and spent an awful lot of Iranian money to fight ISIS and arm militias in Syria and Iran, specifically some of the popular mobilization forces and some of the Shia militias allied to Assad. Some of these militias are made up of either Afghanis or Pakistanis who are living in, I believe, Iran, and were shipped over there and helping to fight. And so if Iran is attacking ISIS and al-Qaeda in the Middle East, then why is the United States so concerned about them having influence around the Middle East? Same situation, but a little bit different with Hezbollah, just because Hezbollah does occupy territory on the, Israeli border, and so there's a lot more, I don't want to say credible threats to Israel from Hezbollah, but at least it made slightly more sense than the Iranian threat, As Scott Horton liked to say, what are they going to do? Drive their boats all the way around, the Arabian Peninsula and up the Red Sea, to attack Israel. And, that's obviously not going to happen. Of course, I read a very good article about the Iranian missile program and just pointing out that stated Iranian enemies in the Middle East and South Asia have very advanced missile systems, including Israel and Saudi Arabia and, United States missiles in that area. And so Iran is at, a severe tactical disadvantage to the United States and our allies. And so these people aren't our enemies. Hezbollah isn't looking to attack the United States. They're looking to defend the border of southern Lebanon from Israel. And for those people who say, well, there's really no threat there, the Israelis continue to conquer and take over Palestinian land, and they're also pushing deeper into Syria. Of course, the Golan Heights area, which is Syrian, occupied by Israel since I guess the 67 war way back. They're looking to expand on that. They've supported rebel groups in the area. One group known as the Golan Knights, a Syrian rebel group, has continued to maintain and get protection from the Israeli state and fight the Syrian government in southwestern Syria. But like I said, nobody in Syria is our enemy. We could go home. It doesn't make it any bit more dangerous for us. If anything, the United States, by creating its chaos in Syria, is making it more likely for ISIS to thrive. And obviously the whole jihad and the whole fight against Americans, the whole drive to have terrorism, is fueled by the American airstrikes and deaths of civilians in the Middle East. Looking to Yemen, tons more people dying there. It's absolutely horrendous. The United States is helping Saudi Arabia blockade and bomb that country back into the Stone Age. And to the benefit of al-Qaeda and ISIS, who, along with U.S. weapon makers, one of the biggest beneficiaries of the war in Yemen. Nobody else is really winning there. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have been able to take territory, and then fueled with the massive impact and toll on civilians, I'm sure is helping recruiting efforts also in the tribal areas of Yemen. The Houthis are, carrying out some, I guess, pretty heavy repression against some of these tribes, driving people into the arms of the jihadists because they're the most effective fighters on the ground to fight against the Houthis. Saudi Arabia really doesn't have an army. They've tried to put Sudanese mercenaries into Yemen to fight, but that hasn't worked out very well. I believe at one point the Emiratis and the Qataris had quite a few troops in Yemen, but the Yemeni missile program has been good enough to strike targets in Yemen and really keep them from occupying anywhere there. And so again, just like in Syria, you couldn't find a U.S. enemy anywhere other than al-Qaeda and ISIS. And it turns out that here again, the United States is fueling those groups and not hurting them. Looking at Afghanistan, we're putting more sanctions on the Taliban. Again, the Taliban weren't the people who carried out 9/11. That was al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. All those guys, almost all of them, if not all the people who were in al-Qaeda then have been killed or captured. Few of them are even in Afghanistan anymore. The only, real jihad group in Afghanistan right now, I believe, is ISIS, and their presence in Afghanistan is a result of the U.S. drone war in Pakistan. They fled over the border and became refugees and took up the name Islamic State Khorasan Group. That group recently attacked, Save the Children office in Kabul, killing 3 aid workers there, and so that group has suspended work in Afghanistan. And I think that's just a good marker to show how terrible things are going there. Of course, Trump is now looking at adding another 1,000 troops to that war. But the Taliban have only become enemies of the Americans because the Americans are trying to occupy Afghanistan. It's not like if all the Americans left Afghanistan, the Taliban would continue to kill Americans. If you look at it and theorize that maybe Americans never invade Afghanistan in any significant way, they just go in and either, kill and capture the al-Qaeda guys, there's a real possibility that, no Taliban or very few Taliban ever come into conflict with the Americans. And then also, I was looking at, and I'm hopefully going to do a little bit more in-depth report on the Mattis's national defense strategy, but I just wanted to point out that Mattis always points to one of the U.S. enemies, and Trump did this in his speeches as well, as Russia. And these are the countries looking to change global world order and become more powerful and replace the United States as the world hegemon. However, any example of Russian aggression, there's another 15 examples of American aggression they often point to, and the most ridiculous one is the situation in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the United States held one of the most obvious coup d'etats in history, overthrowing the government there and installing a pro-Western government. That pro-Western government looked to put reforms into that country that simply the people of the country didn't want. So they left Ukraine and joined Russia. There's also a portion of Ukraine that's fighting a rebellion against the government that the United States backed because they don't want to live under that government either. It's gotten to the point in Ukraine, though, where the United States is arming Nazis, and this isn't, hyperbolic or in any way exaggerating the situation. There's real neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and they had formed a brigade or a militia there, and whenever the civil war broke out, it turns out that, kind of like in the Syrian civil war, where the al-Qaeda fighters were the most effective, the neo-Nazis in Ukraine were the most effective, and so now they have access to and apparently are using American grenade launchers. Matt Blumenthal gave an excellent interview that I will definitely link to in the show notes page so you go all listen to that in a little bit more detail. And, I think one of the amazing things about everything I talked about in today's show is that I know some people will have heard the last story, throw their arms in the air, go, oh my God, now the United States under Trump is backing neo-Nazis. But the fact is that this has been going on for a long time, that all of these policies that Trump has now picked up are long-standing policies of the American government stretching back. Obama, Bush, Clinton bombed Iraq, the Bush before him bombed Iraq. Reagan supported Iraq against Iran. And so when you go all the way down the list, you just realize the absolute insanity, how everybody bats these terrible policies, and that while they always pretend it's in the American interest and defense of the American people, if you look at who's actually being attacked and actually being bombed, it's rarely, if ever, the actual enemies of the American people. And typically, the bombs are being dropped in ways that creates more enemies for the American people and benefits those groups that actually may want to do harm to the American people. Alright, that's where I'm wrapping up the show today. Like I said in the beginning, share the show. I would really appreciate everybody who does that. So foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, and the Facebook page, The Libertarian Union. The Libertarian Union guys are great. I did a show with Pat McFarland, who is the host of Liberty Weekly, earlier this week, and then I'm going to be doing a roundtable with those guys on Sunday. You could stream it live or listen to it later, but I will be sure to link to that, at least on my Facebook page, and find that the Libertarian Union Facebook page as well. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE. And I do a daily news roundup at the Libertarian Institute and at my site, kylesfilesblog.com.